This is the Homestead Journey Podcast, the podcast dedicated to the pursuit of self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and sustainability. This is episode number 72 of the Homestead Journey Podcast. Welcome, everyone, to another episode. I am so thankful and so glad that you have found us, and I hope that you find this episode very helpful. My name is Brian Wells. I am coming to you from 3B Farm and Homestead here in beautiful upstate New York. And folks, this week has been, it's been a week on the homestead where not much went according to plan. And so without further ado, let's jump on over to this week's homestead happenings, and I will bring you up to speed with what we've been up against here on 3B Farm and Homestead. So over the last couple of weeks, I have shared with you the fact that my wife and I have relocated to this room where I record the podcast. It's our spare bedroom / office, and we had to move across the hall. The reason is, and I'm probably going to do a full episode on this, but I'll just kind of give you the cliff notes. We had a windowsill fail, and water got into the wall, and we ended up with a mold problem. This week, the mold remediators came and did the mold remediation, and what we have found is, the mold problem was a blessing in disguise. My wife called me on Tuesday, I believe it was, is when they did the remediation, and she called me and she said, "I've got bad news." And I said, "What's that?" She said when they got in there, they believe squirrels have been in there and have been chewing on the electric cable. And as I went through and I traced the electric cable, there were places where they had it down to the bare wire. Now, quite frankly, we don't know how far they've gone. We did go ahead this evening. My dad came down and helped me, and we rewired the master bedroom. And it does look like the way things are laid out, they couldn't get any farther down the pike than where the kind of the circuit stops. But the wire does run back towards my son's room. And so we're not sure whether or not there's any kind of rodent damage in there. And so this week I will be opening up that wall and taking a look to see whether or not we need to continue chasing this. But at the end of the day, thank God that we found it. And yes, it's a little bit more money than we were anticipating spending. But, it could always be worse. And so I'm very, very thankful for the mold that we found that caused us to get into this project, even though this is going to hurt us financially. And when I say hurt us financially, folks, we're not going to end up living in a van down by the river. But certainly this is going to impact some of the things that we had planned for this year. And that's just life. Whether you're on a homestead or you are just living life, it's just the joys of home ownership. And folks, sometimes things don't go according to plan. But I like to look for the silver lining in the cloud. And the fact of the matter is, this mold problem, that failed windowsill, I've been kicking myself for 2 weeks over this failed windowsill, but it's been a blessing in disguise. And for that, I'm thankful. But that has really consumed us this week because we spent a number of evenings this week at Lowe's looking at flooring and picking up insulation and all of that good stuff because the carpet had to come out. We're going to have windows replaced, which we were planning on having done anyhow. And we're going to go ahead and have to paint the room. So looking at paint colors and getting paint samples and all of that good stuff. And so that's going to be my life for the next little bit. Consequently, my desire this week to get the seed starting system upstairs into the kitchen and the onion started did not happen. And quite frankly, I'm not sure if it's going to happen this coming week. We'll see. I'd like to get that in place, but we had moved all of the stuff from the bedroom out into the living room, great room area. It was just this big, huge mound of stuff. And so we've cleaned some of that out, moved the bedroom furniture downstairs because we're going to sell it and get new bedroom furniture. See, it's just like a big, huge project here. It's, anyhow. But as a result, the seed starting system didn't get moved upstairs because I just didn't have the bandwidth for it. I certainly wasn't going to ask my wife to put up with me creating yet another mess. So once I get this mess cleaned up, or at least moved out of the way, and most of it has been moved, then maybe we'll talk about getting the seed starting system upstairs, plugged in, and some seeds in it. The good thing is the onions, it was a bonus experiment kind of a thing. Worst case scenario, we go back to planting sets, which is what I normally do anyhow. I have never successfully started onions from seed indoors. And so I was excited to try it out. I've been watching a number of YouTube videos on it. But if this isn't the year, it isn't the year. I would much rather make sure that the house doesn't burn down. So anyhow, folks, again, not complaining here. If this comes across as whiny, I apologize. I'm just letting you know what's going on here on the homestead. I know that for some people, this would be a walk in the park. I totally get that. Some of you down south have been dealing with burst pipes and flooding and all of that kind of stuff. And so for you, you would trade spots with me any day. And I 100% get that. So I'm not crying the blues, but just letting you know, it's been a tough week here on the homestead. And then on top of that, we were going to move the bedroom furniture yesterday down to our garage, and the front yard is just one big, huge sheet of ice. It's kind of warmed and thawed, and we've got some rain. And so my thought was, well, I'll back the truck up to the front door, and then we will go ahead and load the furniture into that. And then we're not going to be as likely to slip and fall and break our necks on the ice. Well, I didn't think things through quite as well as I should have. And the next thing I knew, I had the truck sideways sliding down the hill towards the chicken run. And so then yesterday I spent over 2 hours with the tractor and a tow rope trying to get the truck out of the predicament that I had it in. And in my frustration, I, shall we say, slammed the door on the truck with a little bit of authority. And the window came off the track. And so I spent an hour tearing the door apart to put the window on the track. And so I didn't get anything done yesterday that I wanted to get done. When am I ever going to learn? But anyhow, again, folks, it is what it is. That's just life. And so I hope you have had a much better week than we have had here on 3B Farm and Homestead. Before we jump on over to this week's Charting the Course, if you are interested in supporting the show, you can do so in a number of different ways. First of all, if you could share the show with your friends and family members, people that you think might find it helpful, I would greatly appreciate it. A number of you have emailed me and let me know that you've been sharing these garden episodes, that you find them very helpful. And so thank you so much for that. If you haven't already, if you could jump on over to iTunes or your favorite platform and leave me a review, I would greatly appreciate that as well. A number of you have done that over the last couple of weeks, and I just am so thankful for those reviews and that feedback. Finally, if you would like to support the show financially, you can do so by heading on over to thehomesteadjourney.net/shop, and there you will find a link to our t-shirt store, all of the fabulous designs that we have there, as well as some links to products that we use here on the homestead. And it's not just that these are products that we use on the homestead, they're products that we think you might find beneficial on your homestead as well. So we have books, we have tools, we have some kitchen gadgets, just a lot of different things there, just a whole bunch of links to those things. So check that out, thehomesteadjourney.net/shop. All right, let's pop on over to this week's Charting the Course. So on this episode, we are going to continue our series on starting seeds. So back on episode number 70, we talked about what, when, and how much to start indoors. On last week's episode, episode number 71, we talked about the 6 basic things you need to successfully start seeds indoors. And today I'm just going to walk you through our seed starting system that we use here on 3B Farm and Homestead. A couple of things to note. First of all, this is a work in process. I'm always tweaking things, always trying out different things. So this is what I'm using right now. It could change this year. It could change next year. Who knows? But what I am doing has worked very, very well for us. Now I am going to try a few new things this year and I'll share that with you, but I will share with you on this episode what has worked well. I'll also share with you some of the things that did not work so well. Your mileage may vary. Some things that didn't work for me, you may enjoy. They may work well for you. Keep that in mind. The other thing that I would tell you is that this is not the world's best seed starting system, and I'm trying to sell it as such. If you have a method that works for you, keep doing what you're doing. But if you are brand new to seed starting or you've had some frustrations along the way, then I certainly hope that this episode will serve as inspiration to you to help you on your journey towards starting seeds and beginning that more self-sufficient, self-reliant approach to gardening. This is a bit of an update to a video that I did several years ago. I will link to that video in the show notes back when I was doing more video content on YouTube. And so if you want to watch that, certainly feel free. This is going to be more of an updated version of that. And I'm still going to, I may cover a lot of the same content because there is a lot of similarities to what I was doing then. But I'm going to start from ground zero and just assume that you never saw that video and just walk you through step by step how we start seeds here on our homestead. So the backbone of our seed starting system is a shelving unit that I purchased at Lowe's for, I don't know, 75, 80 bucks, I think it was. It's a 5-tier unit. So it has 5 shelves in it. But the way that I set it up, I only use the 4 bottom shelves to start seeds. It is a wire mesh type shelving unit. And quite frankly, I feel like for most home gardeners, it's almost the perfect size. It is about 4 feet long and it's about 18 inches deep and it's about 72 inches high. So even if you could use the top shelf, for most people, that's going to be over your head. It's going to be tough to see what's going on up there. So that's why I only use the bottom 4 shelves for starting seeds. Being about 4 feet wide means that shop lights that are 4 feet long fit very, very well in it. I hang 2 lights per shelf. So I have a total of 8 lights in my seed starting system. The depth of it being about 18 inches deep is almost perfect for a 1020 tray. Now, if you're not familiar with 1020 trays, 1020 trays are kind of standard flats. You may know them as flats, but standard containers that are used in seed starting. And the 1020 refers to the width, 10 inches wide, 20 inches long. So you can fit about 4 1020 trays side by side almost perfectly on these shelves. So again, you figure 4 times 4, 16 1020 trays fit into this with no problem. This shelving unit is very well built. It is built to last. So yes, it's not exactly the cheapest shelving unit that you might be able to find, but it is very solidly built. It's very stable. You're not going to have to worry about it tipping over on you. It's not going to rust. It's not going to fall apart. It's not going to collapse. It's just very, very well built. And if you don't have a shelving unit to start seeds on, I would highly recommend you consider it. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. As I mentioned, in this, I have 8 lights. It's a mixture of fluorescent shop lights and hyper tough LED lights that I bought at Walmart. The fluorescent lights, some of them were originally the hanging shop lights that you would hang and plug into the wall. Some of them are ones that the gentleman who gave them to my dad converted from being fixed lights. In other words, they were mounted to the ceiling, and he rewired them with a length of electrical cord and a plug on the end of it. You may want to check Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace, because I have found in my area that people have been giving away fluorescent lights as they've fallen out of favor, as people have been moving to the LEDs, you can get them for free or for very, very cheap. Now, keep in mind that if they don't come with bulbs, you need to factor that cost in. And so if it's for free, it's for me. I've shared that with you before. But on the other hand, you could end up spending more in lights if they didn't come with lights or if the ballasts are bad. So keep that in mind. But I use a mixture of the fluorescent lights and the LEDs. As the ballasts have failed in my fluorescent lights, I've replaced them with the LED lights that I picked up at Walmart. Also, remember that on last week's episode, I shared with you about the bundle that you can buy on Amazon of 6 LED lights for less than $40. I have never used those, so I can't tell you whether or not they will work well. But if I were starting from scratch and I had no lights and I was going to go out and buy lights, what I would do is buy that bundle and try it out. If you stop and you think about it, if you're going to go out and buy lights and you were to buy 6 of the hyper tough LEDs that I get at Walmart for less than $20, I think they're like $17. And again, I'll link to those in the show notes. You're going to pay over $100, like close to $120 for 6 lights versus less than 40 on Amazon for that other bundle. So just keep that in mind. If you have used those lights and you have feedback on it, reach out to me, Brian at thehomesteadjourney.net. I'd love to hear what your success or failure has been with those lights. And if you decide to try them, keep me up to date. Let me know. I would be more than happy to pass that information on to other people. Now, the way that I hang those in my system is simply with S-hooks. So I actually have some of the S-hooks right here. And so, whoops, drop some of them. But I just have S-hooks that hang right into those metal shelving units very, very nicely. And then I have what I refer to as dog chain that connects the lights. And then that way I can raise them and lower them as I need to. The lights are then connected to a power strip, which is then connected to a timer so that the lights will come on at 6 o'clock in the morning and they go off 8, 9 o'clock at night. I don't remember exactly what I have it set to, but you're looking for about 14 to 16 hours of light a day. And so by having that timer on, the lights come on when you need them on, they go off when they should go off, and you don't really have to dink around with it and remember to plug them in or to unplug them. I also have some heat mats that I use underneath my peppers and my tomatoes. Now, not everything needs a heating mat for good germination, but tomatoes and peppers can benefit from heating mats. And so I have a handful of those that I use. One was given to me. The other ones I did buy on Amazon, and I will provide links to them in the show notes. With the heating mats, you only want to use them before the seeds germinate. Once the seeds germinate, then you unplug the heating mats and that's it. Moving on to containers. As you may remember on last week's episode, I kind of divided containers up into 4 different groups. I talked about the handmade or the repurposed containers. I talked about the containers that are designed for single use. I talked about reusable flats, and then we talked about soil blocks. And I have tried out things from each one of those categories. In the repurposed or handmade category, I have tried making newspaper pots. I did not enjoy that. I had to form it. It's a round dowel that kind of fits into a base. And I'll go ahead and link to that in the show notes if you're interested in making those. And you wrap the newspaper around the dowel and then press it into the bottom to make the pot. I didn't care for it, number one, because I found it very tedious and fiddly to do. And number 2, I just found the pots to be flimsy and I just didn't care for them. A lot of people use them and love them. The great thing about them is you can just plant them right into the ground. You don't have to take the seedling out. You just plant them right into the ground. So keep that in mind. It might be something that you're interested in trying and you enjoy those kind of things. But for me, it was just far too fiddly and I didn't enjoy it. The other thing that I tried were red solo cups. And I no longer use those to start seeds in. Now, I will pot up into a red solo cup, but the reason why I don't use red solo cups to start seeds in is because of how much space they take in my system and how much soil they take or how much seed starting mix they take. In a 10-20 tray, I can fit almost 50 soil blocks. I can only fit 18-ish red solo cups. Not only that, but a red solo cup is going to take 3 to 4 times as much seed starting mix as a soil block. And so for me, I no longer use red solo cups or their equivalents as seed starting containers. I will pot up into them anything that I'm going to be giving away or anything that I'm going to sell. But as far as starting into those, I don't, just because of how much room they take and how much of the seed starting mix they take. Now, as far as the single use containers, I have tried using or reusing the 6-packs that you would commonly get at a nursery or at a home and garden store with transplants in them. And I've also reused or tried to reuse 3-inch and 4-inch pots. I don't like using them, and I don't make a practice of using them any longer for a number of reasons. Number one is just because of the issue where plants have a tendency to get root bound in containers like that. And so I tend to avoid containers. Even the handmade or repurposed containers can have that problem. But I also found the 6-packs to be very fragile and flimsy. When you went to fill them, you had to be careful that you didn't crush them. And over time, they become brittle, they split. And with the 3-inch and the 4-inch pots, this issue with them is the same as with the red solo cups. They take up a lot of room, they take up a lot of seed starting mix. And so for me, it's just not the optimal way to start seeds. So as you may recall, last year, I did try out a couple of the reusable seed starting kits from Haas Tools. I tried their 162 cell seed starting tray, and I tried their 48 cell seed starting kit as well. I think it was the premium seed starting kit that they have, which, by the way, is really just 2 24 cell trays that are sold together. They both had pluses, they both had minuses, and quite frankly, I will not be ordering any of these again. Not to say that they're a bad product, they just didn't work well for me, and I'll explain why. They are both extremely well made. In fact, Travis has a video on the Haas Tools website of him jumping up and down on the 162 cell tray. It is very, very rugged. You will not need to go out and buy them over and over and over and over again. Very well made. Will probably last you a lifetime. I don't know as the 48 cell trays are made quite as well, but they still are made very, very well. And if you treat them well, I think they will last you a lifetime. But there were a lot of things about both that I didn't care about. First of all, with the 162 cell tray, I feel like for most home gardeners, it's just way overkill. Most home gardeners are not going to start 162 of anything. Now, some people will. If you have an extremely huge garden, you may start 162 tomatoes or peppers or whatever. But for most people, you probably aren't going to do that. And what I found last year is I tried to mix tomatoes and peppers in that tray, and it didn't work out very well because, well, tomatoes germinated more quickly than peppers. They grew a little bit more quickly than peppers. And so I always was struggling to get the light at the right height because the tomatoes were hitting the light, the peppers were struggling to catch up, and it just didn't work very well. The other thing about that is the cells are so small. One of the things I just learned this week is that they recommend that you only keep the tomatoes in the cells for 4 weeks and then you plant them right out into the garden. For peppers, they actually recommend that you pot them on for an additional 2 weeks. I don't like to pot things on unless I absolutely have to. I really personally feel like you only have to pot things on when you've started them in too small of a container or you've started them too early. Now, there are a few caveats to that. I understand why market gardeners, people who are starting a lot of things, might want to germinate a lot of things in a smaller space, especially when you're dealing with seed mats and those kinds of things. I get that. But I think for the home gardener, For most people, there is no need to pot things on if you start things in the proper size tray and at the proper time. But anyhow, I'm getting way off track here. So we'll come back to the seed starting tray. So with that, again, they recommend, I think, 4 weeks on the tomatoes, and then the peppers, it's 4 weeks, and you pot them on for an additional 2 weeks. I don't care for that. And so again, that was a bit of a downside. Now, one of the other things about the 162 cell tray that I did like is that it has the ribs on the inside that are supposed to train the roots to go down instead of getting root bound. And it did appear to me that they were doing that. I don't feel like, for how my system is set up and the size and the shape of my shelving unit, that it is the most efficient way for me to start seeds. Now, yes, I can get 162 transplants in a small area, but there's also a lot of wasted space, at least in my opinion, because of how the tray is shaped. In that same amount of space, I can get at least 3 and potentially almost 4 1020 trays. And in 1020 trays, I can get 50 soil blocks. So I'm at least at 150 soil blocks, potentially almost 200 soil blocks in almost the same amount of space that the Haas Tools 162 cell tray is going to take. And I'm never going to have to pot anything on in the 2-inch soil blocks the way that I do things. So for me, the 162 cell tray, I think for people who start a lot of things, it might work out well. If people are using different shelving than what I use, then it might be more efficient, and you might want to build your shelving or design your shelving to fit the seed starting trays. But for me, it just wasn't a good fit. The other downside to it is their cost. They certainly are not cheap. I think they run $39 a piece or $40 a piece without the bottom tray. And so you're starting to really get into a lot of costs there, where a wind strip tray that I'm trying this year is less than $20. I think they're $18 a piece, and they fit in a 1020 tray. So take that for what it's worth. For me, the 162 trays didn't work out well. They may work well for you. They didn't work well for me. Now, onto the 48 cell trays. Again, very well built. I liked the dome that I got on them because, for humidity's sake and helping in germination, they worked well. I didn't feel like they were optimized as well to fit on my shelving unit. Again, if you were to go this route, you probably would want to design specifically for these trays. The other thing about them that I didn't care for is the cells sit down into a bottom tray so that you can water from the bottom, which is what I like to do. I think it's the right way, or the best way, to water in a seed starting system. But the way that they sit down into that tray, it's difficult to pull them out unless I was doing something wrong. But there really were no finger holes to really be able to pull them up very well to then add water underneath. You almost had to have 2 hands and pull it out and set it to the side, put the water, then put them back. And so for me, in fact, I probably am going to modify mine if I continue to use them and put some finger grooves in them so that I can lift them out of the base a little bit easier so I can bottom water. The other thing about them is they don't have the ribs on the inside, so you do have the potential and the probability of plants becoming more root bound. The plus side to the 48 cells is that the cells are bigger than the 162 cell tray, and so you're not going to have to pot things on if you start your tomatoes and your peppers in those kits. As I mentioned, I am going to be trialing out some wind strip trays this year. They're reusable trays from Neversink Farm. I have not used them yet, so I can't really give you any review or any feedback on them. As things go along, I will keep you up to date as to how they work out for us. We also do use some 1020 trays from Bootstrap Farmer to hold the soil blocks. I'll talk about the soil blocks here in a minute, but those are reusable trays. I highly recommend the 1020 trays from Bootstrap Farmer. Extremely well made, so much better, just light years better than the cheap chintzy ones that you get at Lowe's, Home Depot, Walmart. I mean, just so much better. And I highly recommend that if you're going to use 1020 trays, that you get the ones from Bootstrap Farmer. Make sure that when you order them, you get the ones without the holes in the bottom if you are going to be using an indoor seed starting system. I made the mistake last year of ordering ones with holes and had to turn around and send them back. But the ones without holes, very, very durable. I just absolutely love them. And I'm hoping, I don't know, with this whole debacle with the bedroom, maybe money won't allow for it. But I am hoping to buy another pack of the Bootstrap Farmer 1020 trays. You can get them on Amazon, and I just have been very, 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 very happy with them. So on to soil blocks. I absolutely love soil blocks. Soil blocks have worked out very, very well for me. And again, for me, I use the 2-inch soil blocks. I don't start with the small ones. I don't pot up to the 4-inch soil blocks. My opinion, this is just my opinion. If you start things at the right time, you don't need to pot them on. There are exceptions. I get that. You may live in a place where you need to pot things on in order to be able to get in enough of a growing. I get all of that. But for most people, if you start things at the right time, you don't have to pot things on. One of the things I see many, many people do is they start things way, way, way too early. If you are disciplined enough, you can plant into a 2-inch block and you can transplant that out in the garden and have great success. I have done it. I have done it. I have done it. Absolutely love these soil blocks. So why have I been dinking around then with the trays, these reusable trays? Making soil blocks to me is fiddly, and I just don't like fiddly things. You have to mess around with getting the consistency of the seed starting mix correct. And yeah, you only have to do it a couple of times a year, depending on how many transplants you're starting. But I don't enjoy it. Maybe I'm just a wimp. I know first world problems. I get it. But I do find it to be a little bit fiddly. And the other piece to it as well is it hurts after a while using that soil block maker and pressing it. It hurts. At least it does me. And again, maybe just big old wimp here, crybaby. And certainly I'll own it. I guess I'm just soft. I work a desk job. But if you're somebody who does have carpal tunnel or problems with that, then soil blocks may not be the route for you. I'm just being honest, because depressing that plunger over and over and over again after a while, and then just it being wet and that soil rubbing on your hands and whatnot. I guess maybe I should use garden gloves. Maybe that's my problem. I'm just not using the right equipment. But for me, making soil blocks is a little bit on the fiddly side. The other piece is, well, I've been saying that you can put 50 in a 1020 tray, and that is absolutely true. You do have to kind of smush things in there a little bit. And then at that point, you do lose some of the benefits of the air pruning, because in essence, what the soil blocks see is just one big, huge brownie batter. And they just kind of, the roots kind of from one start growing over into the next soil block. And so when you go to plant, you have to kind of split them apart a little bit. Last year, I tried to have a little bit more discipline, and I only put in rows of 4 instead of rows of 5. I don't know. I may just go back to smushing in 50. I didn't really see a whole heck of a lot of difference, to be honest with you. So soil blocks, absolutely love it. I think it's probably the most economical way to start seeds, to be honest with you. I mean, you're using a seed starting mix. You're pressing it into a soil block maker that's like $30. You buy it once, you've got it for a lifetime, and you just make thousands and thousands and thousands of soil blocks. The thing's not going to go bad on you. So I do highly recommend soil blocks. Now, moving on to the seed starting mix that I use. When I first started making soil blocks, I tried some of the DIY mixes, and I didn't have great success with. I had a lot of problems with mold and mildew and with algae buildup, and it just didn't work out well for me. And maybe I was just using the wrong base ingredients, But what I ended up doing is switching over to something called ProMix. And it's actually ProMix BX. Now, it is not technically a seed starting mix. If you look on the side of ProMix BX, it refers to itself as a multi-purpose mix. Technically speaking, I believe ProMix's seed starting mix is called ProMix PGX. I have never used it. My understanding is that the difference between ProMix PGX and ProMix BX is simply how coarsely ground or how finely ground, if you want to look at it that way, the base material, which I believe is peat moss, is. And the BX is going to be a little bit more coarse, which means that if you're making soil blocks, it's going to hold together a little bit better. If I were starting seeds only in containers, I might look at just using the PGX. But a lot of market gardeners, a lot of people who start seeds from scratch actually recommend ProMix BX. So you might want to take a look at that. They make some mixes that are labeled organic. So if that's something that is of concern to you, then you might want to check those out. I think maybe I tried one ProMix organic. It might have actually come with the kit from Haas Tools last year. It might have come with the organic version of ProMix. I don't remember. Well, I use ProMix BX. Find what's available in your area and use it. It's worked well for me. If you can get a hold of it, it's not the cheapest stuff out there. I think a bale cost me about $35 or something like that. So it is not exactly the most inexpensive stuff on the market, but it has worked very, very well for me. And so if it's not broke, I ain't going to fix it. I can make soil blocks out of it. I can use it in the trays. And so that's what I will continue to use. And I certainly recommend that to you. So that really is the nuts and bolts of my seed starting system. It consists of the wire rack with a mixture of fluorescent and LED lights connected to a timer. I use some heat mats to get my peppers and tomatoes to germinate more quickly. And I am using 1020 trays. I'll be trialing the wind strip trays this year and soil blocks. And my base seed starting mix is ProMix BX. If you've got any other questions with regards to what I do here on 3B Farm and Homestead to start seeds, I'd be more than happy to answer those questions. If you have had issues starting seeds, I'd be more than happy to answer questions and try to help you and point you in the right direction. Certainly not an expert in this area, but through trial and error, this is what I am doing here. And I have really had a lot of good success starting seeds indoors using this system. And I think for most home gardeners, this is really going to work well. It's a system that doesn't take up a lot of space, but it's something that if it doesn't have enough room for you, again, keep in mind, 50 soil blocks in a 1020 tray, we're talking 800 plant starts. For most home gardeners, that's going to be way more than enough. But if you need more room, buy another shelving unit and just keep adding to it. So that's it for this episode. If you have any comments or questions, you disagree with me, you have any tips that you'd like to share with other people, reach out to me, Brian at thehomesteadjourney.net, or you can also reach us on Facebook, Instagram, MeWe, YouTube. The links to all of our social media is in the show notes. I have provided links to all of the gear that I talked about in the show notes. Some of the links will be affiliate links. Some of the links aren't affiliate links. My concern is that you have success in starting seeds. As always, the music on this episode was provided by audionautics.com. So a big shout out to them. And until next time, everybody, keep up the good work.